Instead of two equally contributing parties, you have a perpetrator and a victim. And that's how you need to view it. Perpetrator, victim. One person is dominating and controlling and oppressing the other. It's that power imbalance that completely changes what the relationship looks like. Now, that doesn't mean that the victim is sinless. It doesn't mean that at all. In fact, I've kind of altered this diagram a little bit, where I'll have little arrows coming out from the victim going up. So it's not that she's not sinful, but it's not that. It's this. And that's just a very, very different dynamic. Is that clear in a relationship? Difference in a perpetrator and a victim versus equally contributing parties. So domestic abuse requires a completely different paradigm. And this leads to the fifth mistake to avoid. Do not recommend or conduct marriage counseling with an abusive relationship. It does not work. And this is not theoretical, okay? I've done it. I've tried it. It does not work. And I have countless women who said, we've been to 5 different marriage counselors over 10 years, and none of it worked. It does not work. There's a couple of reasons for that. First, if you operate under the oppression paradigm, where there's a perpetrator and a victim, you're going to be spending most of your time talking about his sin. And he is going to feel singled out. He'll think you've taken her side, and he will leave the process. That always happens in marriage counseling when one person feels you're taking the other person's side. He will leave the process. If you try to avoid that by focusing on both people equally, she will think the abuse, at least some of it, is her fault. I have gone to a marriage counseling session and told the wife, now I'm going to have to talk about some ways you've sinned. I don't mean any of it. I wasn't making things up, but I know he's the problem. But if we don't talk about you a little bit, he's going to leave. She called me the next day in tears because she thought that the abuse was her fault. So I've gone to that length. Now, is she sinless? No, she's not. But nothing justifies abuse. Right? We all have spouses who sin against us every day, and we don't abuse them for it. There is nothing someone else can do that can make me abuse them. Right? So she did not cause the abuse. It's not her fault. So that's the first reason not to do marriage counseling. Here's the second. Let's say you sit down with the couple and you ask the wife, so how'd it go this week? If she is sitting right next to the man who has intimidated or even beaten her, do you really think she's going to tell you the truth? And if she does, if she does get up the courage to be honest with you, what do you think will happen to her when she gets home? Marriage counseling in an abusive relationship puts the wife in a position of having to choose between lying or being abused. And no person should ever have to be in that situation. No one. So rather than marriage counseling, they need to be counseled separately, individually, or in groups. Groups of survivors and groups of perpetrators. And we'll talk more about that tomorrow night. I'll tell you about what we do in our ministries to survivors and perpetrators and how that works. Are there any questions at all about common mistakes to avoid? Yes?
We had a perplexing case recently. It's not really a marital case. It's a parent and an adult child, where the parent is cutting the adult child off from all contact, just looming over their life and acting kind of dependent in some way but controlling in the other. And we were a little bit flummoxed about how to proceed in that.
Sure.
So what would your comment be in a case like that?
It's possible that their relationship is somehow abusive. Certainly the parent, I don't know if it's a man or a woman, but it could be abusive toward the child, but not toward the spouse.
There is no spouse. It's
a single parent.
Same gender.
Okay, yeah.
Parent, child.
It's certainly possible the relationship is somehow psychologically abusive. you have to be careful with, I'll talk about this more tomorrow as well. There are some ways in which it's perfectly appropriate for a parent to treat their child, depending on the age, that's appropriate and even good parenting, that when you do it to a spouse, becomes abusive. We've had a case where a husband would send his wife to her room, just as an example, which is absurd. Again, I don't know all the specifics of the case, but it's certainly
This
possible.
is an adult child beyond college
Sure.
age. So, I
I
don't
don't.
take that.
I don't want to sit here and tell you, oh, that's abusive, because there's a lot more specifics I would need. One thing I would say to look out for is, how many people have read Ted Tripp's book, Shepherding a Child's Heart? He talks in there about authority versus influence, and when a child is young, you parent from a position of authority, and by the time they're 18, you're influencing them, and gradually over the span of their life, your authority needs to decrease and your influence needs to increase. You guys familiar with that? Transition is almost impossible for an abusive man, because all he knows is authority and control. And so typically when a child gets around adolescent age and he needs to start making that transition, he can actually, or she, start using abusive tactics, verbal abuse and whatnot toward the children. So that's something to look out for. I mean, it's certainly possible.
Well, my question is, what kind of professional help do you seek to get into that and try to have some resolution? Where do you take that
Yeah.
to get it fixed?
I mean, if you think it might be have some abusive dimensions to it, I would take it to a counselor who is equipped to deal with abuse. Not all counselors are, but I would take it to a counselor who at least understands the dynamics of an abusive relationship and then would have an idea of how to proceed. I had one case where I was counseling a 16-year-old and her father was verbally, psychologically abusive toward her. And she actually cut off a relationship with him. And I came to a place where I told her I think that's the best decision you could have made. Maybe when you're in your 20s, 30s, you can come back together, but right now, he can't relate to her apart from demeaning her and belittling her and assaulting her with some of the most disgusting language you can imagine. So it's a different dynamic. I would love to talk with you afterwards. I need to know some specifics in order to give you some specific direction on the case, if that makes sense. I can't talk specifically about something that's general. Yeah.
Shane, I know you'll probably hit this a lot more tomorrow night, but can you briefly talk about why separation and extended separation is a key part of dealing with oppression issues rather than typical marriage conflict issues where we'd say, okay, separation is only going to make things worse. So.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that tomorrow night. One of the things we really advocate is what's called a structured separation, where you create a document that outlines, and they need to last at least 6 months, a year is better, outlines, here's the things he's going to do to change, they're going to live in these locations, this period of time, here's how finances are going to work out, here's how often they're going to see each other and under what terms, and you give him a roadmap for repentance, and you give her a roadmap for recovery. And that also needs to include some new patterns she needs to develop in her life as well. A reason we really are strong proponents of that is she needs to be in an environment where she can be safe in order to begin healing. And one of the things I hear a lot is if they're not around each other, they won't have a chance to work through things and put things into practice. Putting things into practice for a survivor of abuse, when he messes up, she gets abused. This is not just, batting practice. It's serious. Also, all survivors of abuse, to some extent, to varying degrees, have symptoms of PTSD. They've actually mapped the brains of survivors of abuse and they look very similar to survivors of war. Now, it may not be as bad. Typically, you have to have childhood sexual abuse to be experiencing flashbacks and things like that. But there are some basic trauma responses that are very similar. Diane Langberg, she's a professional counselor in our denomination. She talks about PTSD, and the thing that she stresses is the first word of PTSD is post. To be able to heal from trauma, you have to be done experiencing it. I mean, imagine giving soldiers PTSD counseling and then handing them their weapons back and sending them back out in the field. It's absurd. She needs to be in a safe place before she can ever begin the process of healing. So we advocate, and we've done this, and it works really well, separation, where he has to demonstrate changed behavior for 6 months to a year. And she can be in a context of safety to begin to recover, and then they come back together. So, yeah, that's a good question. We'll talk more about it tomorrow in a little more depth. All right, so, again, how to help an abusive marriage will be one of our primary areas of focus tomorrow night. I can't tell you what it is and then tell you everything you need to know about how to help in an hour. So we'll focus on how to help tomorrow. But I would like to give you some thoughts in that direction. First thing I would say is we should, as the church, we should respond to oppression the way God does. And in Scripture, God is always on the side of the oppressed. Every time. From Exodus all the way through the prophets, all the way through to Revelation, he's always on the side of the oppressed. He hears their cries. He acknowledges that a terrible evil has been done to them, and he redeems them from oppression with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. That's how God responds. He didn't tell the Israelites, well, maybe if you hadn't grown so numerous, the Egyptians wouldn't have oppressed you. He doesn't do that. He gave them validation, he gave them promises and hope, and then he rescued them. And that's how we need to respond. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, they only have one Redeemer, they only have one Rescuer, but we can be the instruments that he uses. Second, here are some tips for identifying an abusive relationship if you're doing marriage counseling. Especially those who are pastors, but also we have some others who do marriage counseling. First, know the abusive behavior patterns we've discussed, as I talked about. She may have the courage to tell you some of the ways he's treating her. She might, but she'll probably not use the word abuse. And most of the time, she probably won't even know the ways he's treating her are abusive. Sometimes, even if the abuse is physical. I've had women think it's not physically abusive because, well, it's not like he hits me every day. Like, that's the bar. It's just once a month or once a week. I mean, it's incredible because women don't want to believe they're in an abusive marriage. So they ignore some of the facts. So you have to know. You have to know what abuse looks like so that you can identify it when you see it. So know these behavior patterns. Be sensitive to hints the survivor may give or opportunities she may create to tell you about the abuse. The fourth, I said we discovered 4 abusive relationships in our church in just a few months. The fourth one came right after I started the refuge. We had announcements in the church bulletin that we were doing this, and a woman called me and said, I would like to help. I'm like, okay, well, I could use some help, you know. She's like, what are you reading there? I told her we're going to be going through this book. And she said, okay, I'd love to get a copy. I'll be right there. And I said, well, you just give it to you at church on Sunday. You know, she actually lived out of town. You don't need to come all the way into town. Oh, no, I really want to get it, and I want to be ready for the group at night. Really? You don't? No, I'm coming in. Okay. She came in, and I had just read a chapter in another book that talked about being sensitive to hints, or she may create a window to be with you privately and tell you about the abuse. So when she came, I gave her the book, and I said, do you want to go talk in the church library? That's where I do counseling sessions with women. One-on-one is in the library. And she said, yes. And we went in the library, and she just unloaded on me. And she was in an abusive relationship. And if I hadn't read just the day before, by God's providence, in that book, I would have handed her the book and probably said, see you later. So you got to be sensitive to that. Yes?
What's the role of us as men partnering with women in our church in these situations?
Yeah, I'm actually going to get to that in just a second. Yeah, it's great. I might not answer that specific question. I meet with survivors of abuse one-on-one. It's really being practical for me not to. I have some boundaries. I don't sit next to them. I sit across from the table. That's as much for some of them sexually abused as children. They don't want a man. just met sitting right next to him. But also for me, again, I don't meet in my office. I meet in the church library. And for us, there's the front door and there's the library. And there's 2 doors to the library, complete windows. It's very public. I don't allow, I put structures in place to protect my marriage and to be above reproach. But partnering with women is a wonderful thing to do. If I didn't spend, I'll put it this way, any time that I can, I have a woman with me. That's just not always possible for me. Yeah.
Just a quick one as far as tips. How about third party? The other person, this woman has told this other woman.
Yeah.
And that's where you get the information. How do you deal with that?
I would try to create an opportunity to be alone with the woman yourself, or to be with the third party yourself. But to try to create an opportunity for you to hear from her directly without her husband's knowledge. And that's important. It has to be without her husband's knowledge, or it should be. We rely pretty heavily on the Hebrew midwives in Exodus 1 in terms of sometimes you don't always need to tell everyone about everything in order to protect innocent life. So, yeah. Yes?
Is there a danger in meeting with an abused woman alone?
What do you mean a danger? Like?
Danger that she might start clinging to you or want to cling to you or see you as some sort of...
Yeah. I again, for me, I should also say, I never meet with one when we're the only ones in the building. And the library, I mean, you can see everything that's going on in that room. And so, yeah, I would not want to consistently meet with abused women one-on-one in my office. I think that'd be very unwise. Yeah. If you can bring your wife with you, that would be the best thing to do. Bring your wife. It's a wonderful thing to do. Third, make it your policy to have the second counseling session when you do marriage counseling be individualized. Every time. No matter how great. Maybe especially if you think the husband is just this great guy that everybody loves. That does not mean that he's not abusive at all. In fact, that sorry for all you guys everyone loves, but kind of fits. But I mean, really, every time. What I do is when I meet with a couple for the first time for marriage counseling, one of the first things I say is, we're going to do a joint session today, and then next week, I just always like to meet with the couple with one-on-one, an individual the second time. And then when you meet with the wife, one of your primary goals should be to try to see if the relationship's abusive. This has other advantages too. You could find out secrets from the husband. You could find out a lot of other things, but it definitely has advantages if the relationship's abusive. We have an intake form for the refuge when a woman comes to meet with us for the first time. And when I do a marriage counseling session, the second session where I'm with just the wife, I sit there with my intake form. She doesn't know it. She doesn't know why I'm asking the questions I ask her. I ask her some questions like, would you describe your husband as a controlling person? Does he tend to get angry a lot? And it becomes pretty clear real quick if he's not abusive. And then I just kind of set the form aside and talk about other things. In the majority of cases, because again it's 1 in 4, the majority of cases he's not abusive. But the ones that are, it's a great way to catch it early on. So I'd say that's the most important tip for identifying it. Third, yes?
Will tomorrow be taped by any chance?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Yes.
You can also, I can give you guys my PowerPoint slides and stuff. I also have on our website, I taught in this fall quarter a Sunday school class on domestic abuse that we use to equip our elders and deacons. And you can get PowerPoint slides, audio, and handouts on our church website. So faithcub.com. So the third thing you can do, again, just to start, is become equipped to respond to domestic abuse biblically. One resource I would highly recommend is the book Violence Among Us. You've got the information on your handouts. It's written by 2 Christian counselors. It's an excellent introduction to ministering to abusive families. We use it to train people in domestic abuse intervention. It's very easy to read. It's 150 pages. I mean, that's like that thick. I mean, you can breeze through it. It's a great introduction. The best thing you could do is equip people in your church to minister to abusive marriages. And that's actually something that we would love to help you with. Let me tell you a little bit about what we've done as a church, and then I'll talk about maybe some things that Village 7 could do. We have a ministry that I've mentioned a few times for survivors of abuse called The Refuge. Currently, there are over 40 women involved from various churches and backgrounds. Actually, 80% of the women who attend go to another church, or they do not attend church at all. We've got 2 support groups, which use a curriculum that I've written. And each woman involved in the refuge is mentored by one of the leaders of her support group. And her mentor contacts her frequently and helps shepherd her through the recovery process. We have a program called Houses of Refuge, which provides survivors with temporary housing by putting them up with Christian families, which is a great mercy ministry. It's also a great outreach. Last year we had 2 women come to faith in Christ through the refuge. And right now we've got 3 women, 3 unbelievers who are a part of the refuge. So it really kind of combines pastoral care, mercy ministry, and outreach. We also have a batterers intervention program for the men called Turning Point. Right now we've got 9 men involved. All of them are married to women in the refuge. And we're seeing some real fruit. It is really exciting to see the things that God is doing. We're not quite ready to reduplicate it or train others, but we're working toward that. It's myself and Lloyd, who's a senior pastor at our church, and then another gentleman named Jay. I'll co-lead it. And this fall, we launched a ministry for the kids called Refuge Kids. We have a mental health worker at a local elementary school who attends our church, and she works with me to develop curriculum that provides Christ-centered counseling for kids through play and group activities. Most of it is group-based. So it's at the same time as the refuge, the mothers come and don't have to worry about childcare and just drop their kids off and they go downstairs. Now, everything we're developing is done with an eye toward reproducing it in other churches. And that's where Village 7 comes in. We would love for Village 7 to start a chapter of the refuge in your congregation. Now, I know that Mark is just dying for something else to add to his plate. Or Kevin, Brian. No, I know that's not true. So let me just say a couple other things before Kevin kicks me off the stage very quickly. First, I'm not talking about necessarily anyone in this room doing this. Or I'm not talking about you doing all of this. In fact, again, we're not ready to train or reduplicate anything but the refuge at this point. We're working toward it, but we're not ready. I'm just talking about you having a support group for survivors of domestic abuse at your church. And I think that is something that would probably be very manageable for Village 7 to do. Second, no one in this room, if they don't want to, has to be involved in the day-to-day running of it. You can recruit 4 women and then just have them report to someone on the pastoral staff or report to an elder. And we can provide everything they need. I'll train them. They can use our curriculum. They can use our logo and our promotional materials. We have structures in place for doing ministry, policies and procedures and forms. We have everything that they would need to just start a support group at your church. And there are huge advantages to a support group versus one-on-one counseling for women. Particularly the isolation. When they get in a room and they hear other women, they realize, I am not alone. I am not alone. That sounds just like what I've experienced. Wow, I remember. And they can minister to one another. It's really, really powerful. Yes?
Don't we have Sarah's daughters? Doesn't that sort of have some of this as a ministry?
There'd be some overlap, but it's different.
Yeah. It's different. Yeah. I'm just saying, if we could piggyback on something in that group.
Yeah.
Does the refuge require a safe house?
Oh, no,
It doesn't?
No. No. In terms of for a place to meet?
No, I mean, a secret place that the women would go to.
Yeah.
Their husband couldn't find them.
No. That's a wonderful thing to have, but no, it doesn't require it. Yeah, we don't have one. That's why we have houses of refuge. We have families in our church and other churches. If they have a basement apartment that they're not using, something like that, we put survivors up in there. But we don't have any kind of a shelter or anything like that. And you don't, again, we had the refuge for over a year before we started Houses of Refuge. You don't, we can train you to help women find resources in the community and find safe places to go. You don't have to provide that for them. You can just help them think of possibilities and connect them with opportunities. So, if you can, it would be a wonderful thing to do, but it's certainly not necessary. No. Yeah.
I was curious if you could summarize maybe a few key things that cause a man to want to change. We realize it's the Holy Spirit, but I'm just curious, like, what has gotten,
Yeah.
The men to want to go to a turning point?
Because they know if they don't go, their wives will divorce them.
Okay.
And if that won't do it, they need to be court ordered
Okay.
because they've been convicted. So yeah, I mean, turning point is definitely would not work without the refuge. I'm certified in batter's intervention. We could be a court-ordered group if we wanted, where men who are convicted would go. We're not at this point. We've thought about it, but it would really change the dynamics of things. No, the men are there because they know if they don't go, their wives will leave them. I mean, it really. They will not. We have one pastor in town say, I'd love to start Turning Point at my church. We're like, great. How are you going to get anyone to go? Are there just abusive men lined up at the door? No. We'll talk about this tomorrow, but what enables a man to be abusive, Paul Tripp calls it an intricate web of self-deception. Jeremiah 17:9 says, the human heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? There's layers of blame shifting, denial, justifying their behavior. And so really they come because they don't want to be divorced. Then, after they've been coming for a few weeks, it's a 40-week program. This is not like a 1-month thing. It's a 40-week program. And the only reason it's 40 weeks is because I didn't think guys would agree to go for 52. It takes a long time to change an abusive man. But at some point, it changes from I'm only here because I have to be here to I have a problem and I need God's help. That happens at different points along the way for different men. Does that make sense? I was telling Kevin earlier, I've had numerous times where I've sat down with an abusive man and said, you are actually committing domestic abuse. And I've confronted him with his behavior. Once his wife, you never want to do that unless his wife is in a safe place, by the way. And it has not gone well once. Not once, you're right. So we try to be as non-confrontational as possible with that first initial meeting. We have a one-on-one meeting with them at first. And the goal is just get them into the group. Don't get them mad. They're going to come because they have to come. They don't want to be divorced. So just get them into the group. And then the group process does it in a way that the men aren't defensive. We're discussing things as a group. It's not me saying, you are sinning in this way. We're discussing let's discuss finances as a group. And then as you discuss it, you talk about economic abuse. So that's, I would say key things would be accountability. In addition to an external heart change, the key thing would be accountability. He needs to experience some consequences for his abuse, and there need to be further consequences if he doesn't change. Yeah, which is why church discipline is very helpful. Yeah.
We started talking about the need, and I'm trying to get a sense of the prevalence of abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say we're a church of 500 families.
Yeah.
How many families would you expect? Marriages of 500 would you expect to be abusive?
Yeah.
Maybe hard to say.
It is. The reason it's hard is the only thing we have hard data on, again, is men who are convicted of assaulting their spouses. Everything else is an estimate. And I chose the most conservative one. I'll tell you, in a church of 275, we have 7 known abusive marriages, a couple that are on the radar, but we're not sure about. Of those 7, 1, the wife is abusive, and the other 6, the men are abusive. So that's what we know of in a church of 275.
Families or people? 275 people or
People, not families, people. Yeah.
We are involved with this right now, Kevin and Don and Joe and I. And I have had 5 women so far in the 5 months that I've been doing this that have come up to me and said, I'm in trouble, what can I do?
Yeah.
And so while I'm talking, is this going to be open tomorrow for ladies?
Oh yeah, I would
Just
love for them to
members?
come. And in fact, I told Kevin that I've done some consulting for them and their commission. If she is there tomorrow, I would love to meet her. Yeah, I would love for the women to come. It might be. They should know it may be difficult.
Oh no, they're very.
You know.
Yes, we're very aware of this. I'm sitting here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there are. There's only one woman of the 6 that we know about who are being abused. Only one of them was in my Sunday school class. The rest are in the refuge. They're learning about domestic abuse. They're being ministered to. They don't need to sit through another hour of hearing it, and they don't want to. It's really hard. It's really hard. Yes?
In terms of the demographics of abuse relationship.